When Omar Khalil's algorithm went viral at 3:47 a.m., nobody at TechFlow Inc. could have predicted what would happen next. The Palestinian software engineer had just solved a problem that Silicon Valley's biggest minds had been wrestling with for years. Omar stared at his monitor in the empty office, the green glow of successful test results illuminating his tired eyes. After 18 months of relentless coding, debugging, and optimization, his machine learning algorithm had finally achieved something unprecedented: 99.7% accuracy in predicting cybersecurity threats in real time. The algorithm wasn't just better than existing solutions, it was revolutionary. It could identify and neutralize cyber attacks before they even began, potentially saving companies billions of dollars and protecting millions of users worldwide. Finally, he whispered to himself in Arabic, his voice barely audible in the silence of the TechFlow building. His family back in Ramallah would be so proud. His father, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for Omar's computer science degree at Stanford, his mother, who had sold her gold jewelry to fund his first year in America, his little sister Noor, who looked up to him like he was already changing the world. But what happened when he submitted his breakthrough would shock everyone. Omar's hands trembled slightly as he prepared the presentation for Monday's board meeting. This was it, his moment to prove that the quiet Palestinian engineer in the corner cubicle had been working on something that could transform TechFlow from a mid-tier security company into an industry leader. He had documented everything meticulously: the mathematical proofs, the testing data, the scalability projections. The algorithm was his baby, born from countless late nights fueled by Arabic coffee and his grandmother's voice on video calls encouraging him to show them what Palestinian minds can create. The weekend passed in a blur of final preparations. Omar practiced his presentation dozens of times, anticipating every possible question, preparing for every scenario except the one that actually unfolded. Monday morning arrived with the typical Silicon Valley sunshine streaming through TechFlow's floor-to-ceiling windows. Omar arrived early, setting up his laptop and checking his slides one final time before the 9 a.m. board meeting. The presentation began perfectly, but then everything changed in an instant. "Gentlemen," Omar began, addressing the 12-person board of directors, "what I'm about to show you represents a fundamental breakthrough in predictive cybersecurity." For the first 15 minutes, the room was captivated. Board members leaned forward, asked technical questions, nodded appreciatively at the elegant mathematical solutions Omar had developed. CEO Marcus Chen seemed particularly impressed, taking notes and exchanging meaningful glances with the other executives. "The implications are enormous," Omar continued, his confidence growing. "Early projections suggest this could increase our market valuation by 400% within 2 years. Then board member Patricia Hawkins raised her hand. "Omar, this is impressive work. Can you tell us about your team?" "Actually, I developed this independently over the past 18 months. It's been my primary focus outside of regular duties." The room fell silent. Something shifted in the atmosphere, a subtle change that Omar couldn't quite identify but could definitely feel. "You developed this alone?" Marcus Chen asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Yes, sir. I've been working on it during evenings and weekends." What happened next would haunt Omar for months. Patricia Hawkins exchanged a look with board member David Sterling. "Omar, we appreciate your contribution. We'll need some time to evaluate this properly." "Contribution?" Omar's voice caught slightly. "Sir, this isn't a contribution to existing work. This is a complete breakthrough, original research that could revolutionize the industry." "Of course," Marcus Chen said smoothly. "We understand your enthusiasm. Why don't you send us all the documentation and we'll reconvene later this week to discuss implementation." Omar felt a strange chill despite the warm California morning. Something about their reactions didn't match the magnitude of what he had just presented. But he nodded, gathered his materials, and returned to his cubicle, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. 3 hours later, he received an email that made his blood run cold. The email that arrived that afternoon changed everything he thought he knew about his workplace. The subject line read, "Security Protocol, Immediate Action Required. Dear Omar, due to recent security concerns regarding intellectual property protection, we need to temporarily suspend your access to company systems while we conduct a routine audit of your recent projects. Please report to HR immediately to discuss the transition of your current responsibilities. Best regards. Human Resources Department." Omar read the email 3 times before the words sank in. Security concerns. His work was being audited. He had just presented the most significant breakthrough in the company's history, and now they were questioning his security clearance. The walk to HR felt like a death march. Colleagues who usually greeted him with friendly nods suddenly seemed to avoid eye contact. The familiar office environment that had been his second home for 3 years suddenly felt hostile and unwelcoming. HR Director Jennifer Walsh greeted him with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Omar, please have a seat. I'm sure you're wondering about the email." "I don't understand," Omar said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "What security concerns? I've never had any issues with company protocols." "Well," Jennifer said, opening a folder on her desk, "we've had some questions raised about your recent work, questions about potential conflicts of interest." The accusation that followed was more devastating than anything Omar had imagined. Conflicts of interest. Omar's voice was barely a whisper. Jennifer consulted her notes. "There are concerns that your algorithm development might have involved outside consultation, specifically consultation with individuals or organizations that might not align with American security interests." The words hit Omar like physical blows. "Are you suggesting that I'm some kind of security threat because I'm Palestinian?" "No one is making accusations about your background," Jennifer said quickly. "But the board has decided that given the sensitive nature of your recent work and the potential national security implications of advanced cybersecurity algorithms, we need to conduct a thorough investigation." "National security implications?" Omar stood up, his voice rising despite his efforts to remain calm. "Jennifer, I've been working here for 3 years. I have security clearance. I've been vetted by the FBI. What has suddenly changed?" "Please lower your voice," Jennifer said, her professional mask slipping slightly. "I understand you're upset, but raising your voice isn't helping anyone." The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of what Omar was facing. Over the next week, Omar found himself locked out of his computer systems, his badge access revoked, and his colleagues suddenly distant and uncomfortable around him. The algorithm he had spent 18 months developing was apparently being evaluated by external security consultants. But Omar wasn't naive. He had grown up Palestinian in a post-9/11 world. He recognized the pattern, even if he had hoped that his achievements, his education, his 3 years of exemplary service would protect him from it. He began making discreet inquiries, reaching out to former colleagues who had left TechFlow, connecting with other Arab and Muslim engineers in Silicon Valley. What he discovered was a pattern that extended far beyond his own experience. Khalid, a Lebanese engineer who had been fired from a competing firm 6 months earlier, met Omar at a coffee shop in Palo Alto. "They waited until I finished the project," Khalid said bitterly. 18 months of work on autonomous vehicle navigation systems. Then suddenly, security concerns, background check irregularities, the whole thing. "What happened to your work?" Omar asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Patent filed under my manager's name 3 months after I was terminated. The official story was that it was collaborative work, and my contributions were minimal." The meeting that night opened Omar's eyes to a systematic pattern he hadn't recognized. Through Khalid, Omar connected with an informal network of Arab and Muslim tech workers who had experienced similar treatment. They met in a community center in San Jose, a dozen engineers, data scientists, and developers sharing stories that revealed a disturbing pattern. Fatima, a Syrian AI researcher, had been terminated after developing a breakthrough in natural language processing. Her work was later patented by her company under her white colleague's name. Iham Aid, a Palestinian cybersecurity expert, had been placed under investigation after proposing an innovative blockchain security protocol. He was ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing, but his project was transferred to another team during the investigation period. Youssef, an Egyptian data scientist, had been repeatedly passed over for promotion despite consistently outperforming his peers. When he finally received recognition for a machine learning breakthrough, he was simultaneously notified that his security clearance was being reviewed due to family connections abroad. "It's not always overt," Fatima explained to the group. "They don't say we're discriminating against you because you're Arab. It's always security concerns, background check issues, questions about loyalty." "The timing is never coincidental," Ahmad added. "It happens after we've done our best work, when our contributions are most valuable." Omar realized he had to make a choice that would define the rest of his career. Sitting in that community center, surrounded by brilliant minds who had been systematically marginalized despite their contributions, Omar faced a crossroads. He could accept TechFlow's eventual offer of a settlement and non-disclosure agreement. Take the money, find another job, keep his head down, and hope for better treatment elsewhere. Or he could fight back, knowing that fighting would likely damage his career prospects, but might protect the next generation of Arab and Muslim engineers from experiencing the same systematic discrimination. The decision became clear when he thought about his little sister Noor, who was studying computer science and dreamed of following in his footsteps to Silicon Valley. "I'm not signing any NDA," he announced to the group, "and I'm not letting them steal 18 months of my work without a fight." The legal battle that followed was unprecedented in Silicon Valley. Omar contacted the Council on American Islamic Relations (CAR) and was connected with attorney Sarah Martinez, who specialized in employment discrimination cases. Sarah had been tracking similar patterns in the tech industry and was eager to take on a case with such clear documentation. "The challenge," Sarah explained during their first meeting, "is that these companies are very sophisticated about covering their tracks. They never put the discriminatory reasoning in writing." But Omar had something most discrimination cases lacked: a clear timeline showing that his treatment changed immediately after he presented breakthrough work, combined with documented evidence of the same pattern affecting other Arab and Muslim engineers. More importantly, he had kept detailed records of his algorithm development, including time-stamped code commits, documented research, and emails proving that the work was entirely his own creation. "They made a mistake," Sarah said after reviewing Omar's documentation. "They assumed you wouldn't fight back, so they weren't as careful about covering their tracks as they usually are." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks into the legal preparation, Omar received a phone call that changed everything. "Is this Omar Khalil?" The voice was unfamiliar, nervous. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Jessica Wong. I used to work in HR at TechFlow. I think we need to talk." Jessica had been the HR assistant who had processed Omar's security review. What she had to share violated her confidentiality agreements, but her conscience had been bothering her since Omar's termination. They met at a restaurant in Mountain View, Jessica looking around nervously as she spoke. "The security review was a sham," she said quietly. "The decision to terminate you was made before the investigation even began." "How do you know that?" Jessica pulled out her phone and showed Omar a series of internal emails she had screenshot before leaving the company. The emails, sent between board members and HR leadership, revealed the real reasoning behind Omar's termination. The emails contained explicit discussions about preventing Omar from claiming ownership of his algorithm. Palestinian engineer claims breakthrough. Read one email from board member Patricia Hawkins. Legal concerned about IP ownership if he remains employed. Recommend immediate review of security status. Another email from CEO Marcus Chen was even more damning. Algorithm has 500M potential, cannot risk employee claiming individual ownership. Initiate background security review immediately. The most shocking email came from CTO Robert Kim. Standard procedure for high-value IP from foreign nationals. Terminate employee during security review. Claim collaborative development. File patents under management names. Legal confirms this approach has been successful in previous cases. "Previous cases?" Omar asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jessica nodded grimly. "You're not the first. The company has done this at least 6 times in the past 4 years, always with Arab or Muslim engineers who develop valuable IP. The class action lawsuit that resulted made headlines across Silicon Valley. Armed with Jessica's evidence, Sarah Martinez filed a discrimination lawsuit that named not just Omar, but 7 other engineers who had been subjected to the same systematic theft of intellectual property. The case attracted national attention, not just because of the discrimination allegations, but because it exposed a pattern of IP theft that had allowed several Silicon Valley companies to build their valuations on stolen work. TechFlow's stock price plummeted as investors realized that several of the company's most valuable patents might be built on stolen intellectual property that could be challenged in court. But the personal cost to Omar was enormous. Legal proceedings meant that he couldn't work on similar projects while the case was pending. His reputation in Silicon Valley was damaged by TechFlow's whisper campaign, suggesting that his security review had revealed concerning connections. The support that emerged from unexpected places kept Omar going. As news of the lawsuit spread, Omar began receiving messages from engineers across the tech industry. Many shared their own experiences of discrimination and IP theft. Others offered job opportunities, research collaborations, and investment funding for independent ventures. Most surprisingly, he heard from senior executives at major tech companies who privately supported his case while being unable to speak publicly due to their corporate positions. "What you're doing matters," wrote one anonymous email from a Gmail address. "I'm a VP at redacted company, and I've seen this pattern repeatedly. Thank you for having the courage to fight." Dr. Amira Hassan, a Palestinian-American professor at Berkeley's Computer Science Department, reached out to offer Omar a research position where he could continue developing his algorithm independent of corporate interference. "They can steal your work," Dr. Hassan told Omar during their first meeting, "but they can't steal your mind, and your mind is what created that breakthrough in the first place." The trial revealed corruption that went far beyond discrimination. When TechFlow's internal documents were subpoenaed during discovery, the full scope of their systematic IP theft became clear. The company had not only targeted Arab and Muslim engineers, but had developed a sophisticated system for identifying valuable work by any employee who might lack the resources or connections to fight back effectively. Foreign nationals on work visas were particularly targeted, since their precarious legal status made them less likely to pursue legal action. The scheme involved collaboration with immigration lawyers who would raise questions about visa status precisely when valuable IP was being developed, creating legal pressure that forced employees to choose between fighting for their work and maintaining their legal residency. This wasn't just discrimination, Sarah Martinez argued in court. This was a criminal enterprise designed to systematically steal intellectual property from vulnerable workers. The evidence was overwhelming. Internal emails showed that TechFlow executives had specifically discussed targeting foreign nationals with valuable IP and had developed what they called acquisition protocols for transferring employee innovations to company ownership through manufactured security and visa concerns. The verdict exceeded everyone's expectations. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 8 hours before returning with a verdict that sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley. TechFlow was found guilty of systematic employment discrimination, intellectual property theft, and conspiracy to defraud employees of their innovations. The monetary award was unprecedented: $85 million in compensatory damages, $150 million in punitive damages, and a court order requiring TechFlow to return ownership of all disputed patents to the original developers. But for Omar, the most meaningful part of the verdict was the judge's statement. This court finds that the defendants engaged in a systematic campaign to steal the intellectual contributions of employees based on their national origin and religious identity. Such conduct is not only illegal, but represents a betrayal of the fundamental values that have made American innovation possible. The aftermath changed Silicon Valley's hiring and IP practices permanently. The TechFlow case became a landmark in employment law, establishing legal precedents that made it much more difficult for companies to steal IP from foreign-born employees. California passed new legislation requiring companies to provide detailed documentation of any security review that resulted in employee termination and creating whistleblower protections for employees who reported discriminatory IP theft. Major tech companies revised their internal policies and training programs to prevent similar discrimination, not out of moral conviction, but because the financial risk of class action lawsuits made systematic discrimination economically unfeasible. Omar's algorithm became the foundation for something even bigger. With his intellectual property rights restored, Omar faced a choice about what to do with his breakthrough algorithm. Several major tech companies offered to acquire the technology for amounts that would have made him financially secure for life. Instead, he chose a different path. Working with Dr. Amira Hassan at Berkeley, Omar established the Open Security Initiative, a non-profit organization that developed cybersecurity tools and made them freely available to organizations worldwide, particularly in developing countries that couldn't afford expensive security solutions. "They tried to steal my work to make themselves rich," Omar explained at the initiative's launch. "Instead, I'm giving it away to make the world safer." The Open Security Initiative became a model for how breakthrough technologies could be developed and distributed outside traditional corporate structures, attracting support from universities, foundations, and even some tech companies seeking to demonstrate their commitment to ethical innovation. The network of engineers who had been targeted became leaders in the fight for equity. The other engineers involved in the class action lawsuit used their settlements and newfound platforms to create lasting change in Silicon Valley. Fatima established a venture capital fund, specifically focused on investing in startups founded by immigrants and refugees, ensuring that future innovations wouldn't be lost to discriminatory corporate practices. Omar created a legal defense fund that provided free representation to foreign-born tech workers facing discrimination or IP theft. Youssef launched a mentorship program that connected established Arab and Muslim engineers with newcomers to the industry, providing the networks and support that could help prevent future targeting. The personal cost and triumph were deeply intertwined. The 3-year legal battle had taken its toll on Omar personally. The stress had affected his health, his relationship with his family, and his faith in the American dream that had brought him to Silicon Valley. But it had also revealed strength and community he hadn't known existed. The network of engineers who had supported him became lifelong friends and collaborators. The legal victory became a platform for advocacy that extended far beyond his individual case. Most importantly, when his sister Nora arrived in Silicon Valley 2 years later with her own computer science degree, she entered an industry that was measurably safer and more equitable than the one Omar had encountered. "You changed things, Habibi," their father said during a video call that included Noor from her new job at a major tech company. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after." The global impact grew beyond what anyone had anticipated. Omar's story resonated internationally, inspiring similar legal challenges and policy changes in other countries with large tech industries. The European Union cited the TechFlow case when implementing new regulations protecting foreign workers' intellectual property rights. The Canadian government created a fast-track immigration program specifically for tech workers who had experienced discrimination elsewhere, attracting innovative minds who might otherwise have been lost to discriminatory practices. Even in the Middle East, Omar's success story became a symbol of how Palestinian and Arab innovators could overcome systematic barriers through education, persistence, and collective action. The algorithm that started it all continued to evolve and protect. 5 years after the initial breakthrough, Omar's cybersecurity algorithm had been implemented by organizations in over 60 countries, protecting millions of users from cyber attacks. The Open Security Initiative had grown into a major force in global cybersecurity, with research partnerships at universities worldwide and funding from governments concerned about protecting their digital infrastructure. But perhaps most satisfying to Omar was the knowledge that his work was being used to protect vulnerable communities. Journalists in authoritarian countries, human rights organizations, refugee service providers, and small businesses that couldn't afford expensive security solutions. "This is what the algorithm was meant for," he told a conference audience in Berlin. "Not to make rich companies richer, but to protect people who need protection." The lesson that emerged from the struggle resonated far beyond Silicon Valley. Omar's story became a case study in business schools, law schools, and computer science programs across the world, not just as an example of discrimination and legal victory, but as a demonstration of how individual courage can create systemic change. The key lesson wasn't just about fighting discrimination, but about the power of community, documentation, and refusing to be silenced when facing systematic injustice. "They counted on me being isolated," Omar said during a keynote speech at Stanford, his alma mater. "They assumed that as a Palestinian engineer, I wouldn't have the connections, resources, or courage to fight back. They were wrong about all three." The new generation of engineers built on foundations Omar and others had laid. By the time Omar turned 35, Silicon Valley had become measurably more diverse and equitable. The systematic IP theft that had once been common practice was now legally and financially risky for companies to attempt. Young Arab and Muslim engineers arrived in Silicon Valley with knowledge of their rights, connections to support networks, and the confidence that their innovations would be protected by law. The community center where Omar had first met other targeted engineers had become a thriving hub for innovation, mentorship, and advocacy, supporting hundreds of engineers from underrepresented communities. The fight never ends, but the tools for fighting had multiplied. Even as systematic discrimination became more difficult and expensive for companies to practice, new forms of bias and exclusion continued to emerge in the rapidly evolving tech industry. Omar remained vigilant, continuing his advocacy work while pursuing his research and development projects. The Open Security Initiative had grown to include initiatives addressing AI bias, algorithmic fairness, and the ethical development of emerging technologies. "Victory isn't permanent," he often told the young engineers he mentored, Every generation has to fight for equity in new ways, but each generation also builds on the tools and protections that previous generations created. The algorithm that changed everything continued to evolve. 10 years after his initial breakthrough, Omar's cybersecurity work had evolved far beyond his original algorithm. The Open Security Initiative was now at the forefront of quantum computing security, artificial intelligence safety, and emerging threat detection. But the core principle remained the same. Technological breakthroughs should serve humanity's collective security and prosperity, not just the profit margins of corporate shareholders. Standing in his research lab at Berkeley, surrounded by graduate students from dozens of countries working on cutting-edge security solutions, Omar reflected on the journey from that late night at TechFlow, when his algorithm first achieved its breakthrough results. The code that started it all was just the beginning. The work continues, the community grows stronger, and the next generation of Palestinian engineers, Arab innovators, and immigrant dreamers enter Silicon Valley with protections and opportunities that Omar's generation had to fight to create. In conference rooms where decisions are made about hiring, promotion, and intellectual property, the TechFlow case serves as a reminder that discrimination is not only morally wrong, but legally and financially dangerous. And in labs around the world, the code continues to run, protecting millions of users from cyber threats. The breakthrough that they tried to steal became the foundation for protections they never could have imagined. The voice they tried to silence became the voice that changed an entire industry. The algorithm lives on, protecting everyone,